Old Testament lesson 23. The Lord be between thee and me forever. Before we start, a little quiz. There's a quote here by Joseph Smith. Blank is the grand fundamental principle of Mormonism. Does anybody know what blank is? And blank is the grand fundamental principle of Mormonism. Think about it. We'll come back to it in a little bit. But before we do, I'd like to touch briefly on social media. Currently, there's about 3 billion people in the world, about 40% of the world's population, that use social media. On average, they spend around 2 hours every day on social media. So 6 billion man-hours every day is spent on social media. In 2017, the average American checked their phone about 80 times a day. That's up from about 46 times a day in 2015 and 33 times per day in 2013. And if you just look at the millennials and remove all the other demographic groups, millennials check their phone as much as 150 times per day. 88% of 18 to 29-year-olds indicate that they use any form of social media. That drops a little bit to 78% among those aged 30 to 49. Drops a little more to 64% among those aged 50 to 64. And then 37% among Americans 65 and older. 74% of Facebook users say they visit the site daily, with 51% saying they visit the site several times a day. 63% of Snapchat and 60% of Instagram users visit at least once every day. Now, with all of this social media use, a recent global study revealed that social media users are interacting less face-to-face than in the past, because of this newfound ability to constantly communicate and stay in touch online. People communicate less with their friends, parents, even partners and children, because they can simply follow them on social media. You don't need to call your friends and talk to them about what's going on, because you can see in your Facebook feed what they're up to. So you feel like you're up to speed on their life and what they're doing without ever actually talking to them. And this holds true across every country, regardless of age. Now, there was also been a lot of research done recently that shows that Facebook has been linked to both less moment-to-moment happiness and also less life satisfaction. And now these two things are directly related to Facebook usage, and the more people use Facebook in a day, the more these two variables dropped off. So the more you use Facebook, the less happy you are and the less life satisfaction you have. There's actually a thing called Facebook depression. One of these studies, a quote directly from the study, said, "Rather than enhancing well-being, as frequent interactions with supportive offline social networks powerfully do, the current findings demonstrate that interacting with Facebook may predict the opposite result for young adults. It may undermine it." So while offline interaction with social networks, friends, family, people that you know, has a huge impact on enhancing your well-being, interacting with those same people over Facebook does the opposite. It undermines your well-being. And some of that is because of what's called the comparison factor. Facebook makes people feel socially isolated, even though they may not be, because they find themselves falling into the trap of comparing themselves to others. As we scroll through our social media feeds, we make judgments about how we measure up. So even though we, might be hitting the thumbs up like button or the happy face or whatever, inside we're comparing ourselves and we're feeling worse and worse. Um, and the comparison factor leads to jealousy. Studies have shown that social media use triggers feelings of jealousy. One study said this magnitude of envy incidents taking place on Facebook alone is astounding, providing evidence that Facebook offers a breeding ground for invidious feelings. And this actually becomes a vicious cycle, because when you're scrolling through your Facebook feed and you become jealous of all your friends and the pictures they're posting and the videos and what they're doing, it makes you want to go out and create your own videos and pictures to post that will make somebody else jealous, which will make them want to go out and post their own pictures and videos that'll make somebody else jealous. And it's this endless circle of one-upping each other and feeling jealous. Nearly 60% of people view a friend as having a better life than their own simply by seeing that friend's social media activity. And almost half of people in one study were upset after simply viewing photos from a friend's happy holiday celebration. Now remember, we're not talking to these people anymore. The face-to-face interaction is dropping off. We're not actually interacting and getting the real story. We're just scrolling through the feed and seeing the pictures or the videos, and then thinking that somebody has a better life than us, and actually getting upset over that. And interestingly, the effects of jealousy can accumulate over time. It's not something you don't feel a little jealous and then it goes away. The feelings accumulate. And according to a piece of research published in the journal Science, envy and physical pain make use of the same regions of the brain. So it actually hurts to feel jealous. Now, with all of this, I've got a quote from Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. He says, "Who is it that whispers so subtly in our ear that a gift given to another somehow diminishes the blessings we have received? Who makes us feel that if God is smiling on another, then he surely must somehow be frowning on us? You and I both know who does this. It is the father of all lies. It is Lucifer, our common enemy. It has been said that envy is the one sin to which no one readily confesses. But just how widespread that tendency can be is suggested in the old Danish proverb, 'If envy were a fever, all the world would be ill.' The parson in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales laments it because it is so far-reaching. It can resent anything, including any virtue and talent, and it can be offended by everything, including every goodness and joy. As others seem to grow larger in our sight, we think we must, therefore, be smaller. So, unfortunately, we occasionally act that way." So what do we do? Do we run away screaming from our social media networks? I don't know. It's up to you. It's up to you what you do with that information about social media use. Because that's actually not what this lesson is about. But I wanted to talk to it a little bit because what we are going to start talking about is King Saul. Now, Saul was chosen by God to be the first king of Israel. His first military conflict was with the Ammonites. The Spirit of God fell upon him, and with great authority he called the Israelites out to battle, and a resounding victory confirmed the Israelites' allegiance to Saul. Israel was delighted with their new king, and we read that Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. With this, he was able to unite some of the scattered tribes, giving them even greater strength. King Saul in the early years was courageous in battle. He was a generous king. He was admired and respected by the people. Had a great start to his reign. But then things started falling apart. The Philistines invaded Israel, and Saul's army began to panic and desert him. He waited 7 days for Samuel to come and make offerings to the Lord, like we talked about in the lesson last week. But Samuel did not arrive on time, so Saul decided to make the offerings himself, which was a mistake. And then at a later time, God commissioned Saul through Samuel to destroy the Amalekites. The Amalekites were an extremely cruel and destructive people who had nearly obliterated Israel when they first came out of Egypt. And Saul was able to defeat them, and he liberated a vast area from their control. But under pressure from his people, he spared their king and kept the best of their livestock when he was supposed to completely wipe them out. So that wasn't good. And Samuel went to face Saul with his sin. And Saul's reply is interesting. He says, I have sinned, but please honor me before the elders of my people and before Israel, and go back with me that I may worship the Lord your God. So Saul's concerned here about what people are going to think of him. Similar, if we want to apply these biblical stories into our life, we have to find applications today. How many of us are concerned when we're posting on social media what people are going to think of us? Right? And so King Saul, if he lived in the days of social media, would have been extremely concerned about how many likes he had, how many views he had on his videos or whatnot. So from here on out, Saul's story kind of becomes a steady, sad, downward progression. And it's not long before the Philistines invade again, and this time they bring Goliath. And Saul and his army kind of trembled in fear from Goliath. David, however, hears Goliath's challenge, and his response is, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? And David goes out in the power of God, and one stone from his sling is all it takes to bring Goliath down. And when David returned from killing Goliath, he kind of has a short-lived honeymoon period with Saul, where he gets promoted, he has a lot of success, and things go well. But then things start to go south. Quote by President Ezra Taft Benson. Saul became an enemy to David through pride. He was jealous because the crowds of Israelite women were singing that Saul had slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Now, in today's vernacular, maybe you could say Saul has 1,000 likes on his post, David has 10,000 likes, or 1,000 views on his video, David has 10,000 views. Ezra Taft Benson goes on to say, the proud stand more in fear of men's judgment than of God's judgment. What will men think of me weighs heavier than what will God think of me. Fear of men's judgment manifests itself in competition for men's approval. The proud love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Our motives for the things we do are where the sin is manifest. Jesus said he did always those things that pleased God. Would we not do well to have the pleasing of God as our motive rather than try to elevate ourselves above our brother and outdo another? Some prideful people are not so concerned as to whether their wages meet their needs, as they are that their wages are more than someone else's. Their reward is being a cut above the rest. So going back to the story of David, what do you think of when you think about the story of David before he became king? Do you think about the story of David and Goliath? Do you think about Saul trying to kill him? How many of us think about his friendship with Jonathan? That's actually what this lesson is about, is that friendship and friendship in general. Going back to the quote from the beginning, blank is the grand fundamental principle of Mormonism. Does anybody know what it is? Friendship. Now I don't want to overstate this quote from Joseph Smith. This was not, him standing up in front of everybody and making this pronouncement. This was actually him reflecting in his diary, thinking about his friends. He kind of, in an introspective moment, writes in his diary, friendship is the grand fundamental principle of Mormonism. I think there's a lot to be said for that. However, he's not talking about Facebook friends. He's talking about the relationships that enhance your life. through real face-to-face interaction and being with people. And Facebook friends don't do that. So going back to Jonathan, the story of David and Jonathan. Jonathan was Saul's son and David's good friend. Jonathan was very similar to David in many ways. Just like David was unafraid of Goliath when the whole army trembled, Jonathan was unafraid of the Philistines when all of the rest of the army trembled. And he went out with his armor bearer, just him and his armor bearer, and they went out and they caused the Philistines to retreat. He was also a man of faith and courage. When David returned from killing Goliath, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Which is interesting because David was next in line to be king. And at this time in this culture, if a king came to power who was not, related, blood relatives to the previous king, he would usually assassinate all of the previous king's family and offspring, so that there wouldn't be any risk of them coming to challenge him on the throne. So Jonathan had, good reason not to like David, but did become fast friends with him. In 1 Samuel we read, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. This is very symbolic because Jonathan's royal robes that he had would have indicated who he was and that he was next in line to be king. So for him to take all of that off and give it to David indicates that his friendship with David is more important to him than his position. And Jonathan was in effect stepping aside. There was no jealousy in his heart, no desire to protect his privileged position. Jonathan was not jealous. This was a true friendship. This was a real friend. This was not like so many of our friendships today that are online that incite jealousy and make us upset and unhappy. This was a true friendship. Jonathan was not jealous, but wanted to see the best for his friend. So as Saul becomes more and more mentally unstable, Jonathan is in an interesting position where he's able to protect David from Saul because he's Saul's son. He's living with Saul. And at one point Saul tells Jonathan and all the attendants to go find David and kill him. But Jonathan reminds him that David had been used by God against Goliath. Saul listens to Jonathan and then takes an oath and says, as surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. So Jonathan is able to protect his friend against his father, who's king, who's kind of losing it. But only for so long. It's not too long before Saul makes 2 more attempts to kill David, who flees for his life. And when he leaves, first place he goes is to Samuel the prophet. But then he turns to his friend Jonathan. Jonathan still thought he could continue to protect David, but David recognized where Saul was at and that it wasn't going to work. David was afraid, and he was able to confide in his friend Jonathan. He didn't pretend, he didn't posture, he didn't put on a brave front. He freely expressed his feelings and fears to his friend. Now these are 2 manly men, right? They're warriors. David had been out. He went out and faced Goliath by himself. He went out and killed a bunch of Philistines as a dowry for his wife. Jonathan the same way, great warrior. And here these 2 guys are bearing their soul to each other. In our culture, in North America, how many guys do you know, especially the real manly men, who have a friend that they can bear their soul to? It's not something that I think our culture really finds all that important. And after David bears his soul to Jonathan, Jonathan simply replies, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you. So they end up, Jonathan tests Saul, and Saul fails the test. So Jonathan meets with David, and Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. And then David, ends up becoming a fugitive, from Saul and was on the run for 10 years. Saul's major military campaign from that on out was against David. So, interesting story about a friendship. But how do we apply that in our lives? What does that mean to us? Well, there's some interesting research on friendship, on true friends, not social media friends. An analysis from the Commonwealth Fund notes that between 1999 and 2014, mortality rates in the U.S. rose for white Americans aged 22 to 56. Now, before that, death rates had been falling by nearly 2% each year since 1968. So what changed in 1999 that caused death rates to stop falling, but to actually start rising a little bit? What happened in 1999 that's continued? It's interesting, the difference between these two mortality trend lines, the expected declining one and the actual rising one, has been called the mortality gap. This is a very interesting graph. The gray dots show the expected change in the mortality rate. You see it dropping off quite dramatically, and then the black dots show what the actual was, and the orange line is the gap between the expected and the actual mortality rate. And you can see in some cases it's a pretty significant difference. As technology improves, healthcare advances, we expect mortality rates to drop off. But since 1999, we've found that they aren't. In fact, in 2014, the mortality gap was so big that it accounted for an extra 100 dead middle-aged white people for every 100,000 people. Now, this is an interesting factoid here, and there's been some studies trying to figure out why. Previous studies suggested the reason death rates failed to decline was due to suicide and substance abuse. Now, turns out those factors do explain about 40% of the gap, but the rest are attributable to the leading causes of death, things like heart disease, diabetes, and respiratory disease. Even though, fewer people are dying from those diseases than they were in the 1960s, the rate of decline has slowed over the last couple of decades. So this means that not only are middle-aged white people, they're drinking more, they're using more opioids, and killing themselves at higher rates, but also more of them are getting sick with the diseases that usually kill older people, and when they do get sick, they don't get better. Why don't they get better? What's causing this? Well, a 2010 meta-analysis of 148 mortality studies published in a medical journal found that the mortality risk associated with a lack of a strong social network is comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes every day or more than 6 alcoholic drinks a day. So if you don't have friends, you might as well be smoking up to 15 cigarettes every day or having 6 alcoholic drinks a day, because your mortality rate is going to be about the same. Cigarettes and alcohol are recognized as major risk factors. There's public health campaigns against them. They're prohibited by the word of wisdom. And there's also public awareness campaigns against obesity and physical activity. But the importance of good friends enjoys almost none of the attention in the public health arena. But having a strong social network keeps you alive. If you don't have one, it's like smoking 15 cigarettes a day or drinking more than 6 alcoholic drinks a day. Having a friend to whom you can disclose your feelings is a major determinant of well-being. People with friends are healthier. They're less likely to get common colds, to develop fatal coronary disease, to develop physical impairments or reductions in brain function. As they age, people with friends are more likely to survive the death of a spouse without any permanent loss of vitality. Medical doctor Dean Ornish explains, I am not aware of any other factor, not diet, not smoking, not exercise, not stress, not genetics, not drugs, not surgery, that has a greater impact on our incidence of illness and chance of premature death. Depending on which research you consult, people with good friends have a 22 to 60% lower chance of dying over a 10-year period. Now, 22 to 60% is a pretty wide gap. Some of those studies looked at older people, some at younger people, some at smokers, some at non-smokers, so it was all over the map. But, at any rate, If you have good friends, you've got at least a 22% lower chance of dying over a 10-year period. Interestingly enough, if a person is depressed, having a friend interact with them regularly is as effective at treating depression as antidepressants or therapy. So you can write them a prescription for drugs, you can send them to therapy, or they can just hang out with their friends. In old age, friends are more important than grandchildren for maintaining morale. And according to sociologist Rebecca Adams, friendship is more strongly correlated with happiness than relationships with a spouse, children, parents, or siblings. Friendship is important. It's interesting. A couple weeks ago, we had a lesson about honoring God, and Eli was the high priest, top dog in the church. He was the judge, way up there in the political spectrum. Somebody that you should look to when you're honoring God, right? But he was used as the bad example because he'd kind of blown it with his family and his priesthood was removed. Then you have Hannah, a kind of a nobody, just your average churchgoer. And she's used as the good example. And here we have a story of, there's all kinds of lessons we can pull from the story of Saul and David and Goliath and Jonathan, and yet the lesson manual focuses on friendship. And it's important to have friends and not Facebook friends. Robert D. Hale says, we need to measure very carefully who our true friends are. The measure of a true friend is one who will have us choose between his way and the Lord's way. A true friend makes it easier for us to live the commandments of the Lord. A true friend will not let us do anything we want. True friends will correct us when we do something wrong and bring us back on the straight and narrow. And if you look on LDS.org, in the Use Standards section, it says everyone needs good and true friends. They will be a great strength and blessing to you. They will influence how you think and act and even help determine the person you will become. They will help you be a better person and will make it easier for you to live the gospel of Jesus Christ. Choose friends who share your values so you can strengthen and encourage each other in living high standards. And then in closing, some words from the Savior in John chapter 15. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends, if ye do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you. Now he starts off by saying, this is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you, right? That's the friendship that Jonathan and David had. They loved one another with a very godly love. And then Jesus says, if ye do whatsoever I command you, if ye love one another, if you're good friends with each other, then you're my friends too. Shows how important the friendship is, and not just any friendship, and certainly not a friendship on social media, but a true friendship where you have true deep feelings for each other. You have somebody you can confide in. Not only will it make you happier, not only will it make you healthier, not only will it make you live longer, but it's the commandment that Jesus is talking about here, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Thank you.